All right, hi, welcome to the gathering at Scott Memorial. Not home edition, but I guess sanctuary edition. I'm here at the church because the youth are feeding the homeless tonight. My mom is actually spending the night here, so I wanted to check in, see how things are going, and honestly find a quiet place without 4 kids under the age of 10 running around the house where I could preach. So it's great to be with you. Hope you're really gearing up for Christmas Eve tomorrow. Just a reminder, our Christmas Eve services are at 4:30 and 6 o'clock, so I hope you can join us. All right, our scripture reading for today comes from the Gospel of Luke chapter 2, which says, let me shift it here. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. So before I go too much farther, because that's the story for tomorrow, right? Let's talk for a few minutes about how many ladies out there would be thrilled to travel in your last month of pregnancy on a donkey for 7 to 10 or more days when you were right on the brink of delivering a baby. It's kind of crazy to think about this long journey that Mary and Joseph did not want to take, but they were being forced to take. Joseph for sure, because his family tree was from Bethlehem. He had relatives there and he had to go and register there per the census. But why Mary if Luke says technically they're still just engaged? Well, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that they were actually married by this time, but perhaps more importantly, something Adam Hamilton doesn't talk about in his book called The Journey, but other scholars mention is that it was unsafe, perhaps, for Mary to stay behind while Joseph went to Bethlehem. Because remember, the fact that she got pregnant out of wedlock was still so scandalous that she could have been stoned to death. So for her own safety and protection, can you imagine having to leave your hometown and travel that far because the people of your hometown might try to take your own life? I mean, it's just crazy, and yet that was what Mary and Joseph were perhaps experiencing as they set out from Nazareth to Bethlehem. So here's the thing. There are 2 major routes that they could have taken to get from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and scholars are still debating which path they took. So path number A is not a direct shot south, so you got to pull up a map, guys. I showed one this morning in worship, but it's hard to do on Facebook Live, so go online and Google this and check it out. So option A would be to go east of Nazareth, across the Jordan River, straight down south, and then cross back over to get into Bethlehem. Some benefits of this particular path are that there were no hills, no mountains, so it was, pretty flat and plain, which would have been more comfortable for Mary. It did take a little bit longer. It added a couple of days onto the journey, but the biggest bonus for this path in the eyes of most Jewish people of the day was that taking this route east and then south and back over would help you to completely avoid the region of Samaria. Well, why does that matter? Why would you want to completely avoid the region of Samaria? I'm so glad you asked. Apparently, this is hard for some of us to understand, but you got to think of, Adam Hamilton says, compare the relationship between the Jews and the Palestinians, even to this day. Or think about the conflict in Serbia or in Rwanda, where people who seem to have so much in common just hated each other enough that they would want to even kill each other. That's the kind of conflict that the Jewish people in the area of Jerusalem and Judea had against the Samaritans in Samaria. And it dates all the way back to 722 BC, when the Samaria region fell to Assyria. And so Assyria is this foreign, non-Jewish power. And so they come in and all the really powerful, wealthy, influential Jewish people are exiled. But a lot of Jews are allowed to stay, especially those who are farmers or work the land. And so those that did stay ended up intermarrying or embracing some of the culture of the Assyrians that were moving in to this land that became kind of the hub or the capital of that whole Syrian province there. So Assyria had this strong influence, and we see in 2 Kings 17 that even the worship of the Jews in Samaria was starting to be influenced by the Assyrian people. And so a priest was sent out to say, hey, you guys aren't doing it right. You got to stop blending this worship of the one true God with this polytheistic worship going on here with the Assyrians. So be true to God. And so they kind of felt like the Samaritans were, morally debased or debunked, that they did not really honor and revere God the way that they should, that they were dirty, that they were unholy. And so more prejudices began to form. And in Nehemiah 13, well, even before that, in Ezra 4, as the temple is being rebuilt in Jerusalem, and the Samaritans, Jewish Samaritans, reach out and say, we want to help, we want to be a part of this. And the response from the Jews there in Jerusalem was absolutely not. You guys aren't good enough. You aren't worthy enough to help us build this temple. You aren't clean. It wouldn't be right. And then in Nehemiah 13:28-29, we read that the grandson of the high priest actually had the audacity to marry the daughter of the governor of the province, which again just showed this deep relationship and bond between the Assyrians and the Samaritans that Jews in the area of Jerusalem and other regions around Israel just could not tolerate. And so they would just bicker and banter back and forth. And it got so bad that apparently around the time of Jesus' birth, some Samaritans even went into the temple in Jerusalem and left bones of dead people in there, which would obviously make it unclean and caused a lot of drama. So there was no love lost between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so avoiding that whole region is what most Jewish people would want to do. So why does Adam Hamilton in his book, The Journey, reference his own point of view and that of a guy named Avner Gorin, that Mary and Joseph took the more direct route from Nazareth to Bethlehem and went straight through that region of Samaria? Well, there are a couple of reasons that they really truly feel that this is the path that Mary and Joseph took. One reason is that it would take like 2 days off the journey, which might not sound like much, but when you are 9 months pregnant, could be the difference between delivering in a stable and on the side of the road. So it saved time. Also, because most Jewish people wanted nothing to do with the region of Samaria, it meant a lot less traffic. And if everyone was traveling for the census, it could save them an additional significant amount of time. I mean, think about us. When I have to go through the tunnel and there's not an alternative, I'm stuck and I stick it out. But when I'm at the 264-64 interchange and there's a dead stop in traffic, I'm looking for the nearest exit ramp and trying to figure out how to get to my final destination through less popular roads or interstates. And that's what Mary and Joseph were doing. There were hills, there were mountains. The trip and the journey would be more arduous. And so not as many people wanted to take it. It was harder on them physically, harder on them perhaps spiritually or emotionally with the tie into Samaria. And so they just didn't want to do it. But maybe Mary and Joseph also wanted to go this particular route because by doing so, they were making a statement. And they were saying, we aren't going to judge the Samaritans by their history. We're not going to try to avoid people because we don't think that they're worthy, because we don't want to coexist with them. Maybe, just maybe, I learn and grow and am better because I am open and loving to all of God's people, because I learn not to fear them or avoid them, but to sojourn alongside them, getting to hear their stories, listening to who they are, and learning to see them as human beings as well, worthy of dignity and respect. And perhaps we see that influence of Mary and Joseph on the life of Jesus when he does some pretty radical stuff. Think about Jesus when he met a Samaritan woman at the well in the middle of the day and asked her to get him a drink. She touched the cup that he would drink from. That's something so unclean most Jewish people would not be bold enough or crazy enough to try, but Jesus wasn't afraid of the Samaritan woman. And when Jesus was asked, who is my neighbor? What is the definition of a good neighbor? And his example of the best, most faithful representative of God was a Samaritan. It shocked the crowd as well. But maybe Jesus learned from Mary and Joseph what it meant to not discriminate against others, to be prejudiced against people because they were different, because they spoke a different language or looked a little different. And this is true in our day and age today. Something I love about the gathering is that you will find all kinds of people with different backgrounds, experiences, races, genders, languages, socioeconomic levels, sexual orientations, all together in one place. And we are better because we are journeying together, trying to understand God's love, knowing that we serve a God who loves us all, created us all, and sent Jesus to die and save us all. So it's a beautiful space to be. I was bragging about someone from our church who this morning woke up and was here at 5 a.m. to help feed the homeless. And when one of our homeless women didn't have shoes that fit her, Someone from our church took the shoes right off her feet, which happened to be the right size, and gave it to her. That's beauty. That's learning to not fear people who are different from you, but to love and to serve them. And just this last week, I had coffee with someone that's been around the church for like 8 or 9 years, and we were talking about some of the things we have in common, but then some of our very distinct differences. And we remarked that being in a church community together and listening to each other and learning from each other has made each of us better people in the areas where we don't agree. I think sometimes we are so afraid to say, you know what, this is where I'm coming from and why. Why don't you tell me your story? But we are better off when we do that. So I don't know what your story is, where you are on your journey in between Nazareth and Bethlehem, but may you take some time today and tomorrow and over Christmas break to really reevaluate your journey and to ensure that you are headed in the right direction with the right heart towards those you might encounter along the way. Have a great night, guys. I will see you tomorrow.